Last September saw the release of one of the worst horror animes ever, by the name of Uzumaki. Now I'm not the biggest fan of anime, more a casual viewer. Same with manga. Last thing I probably read was the final season's worth of Attack on Titan, because holy shit, I got tired of waiting 4 goddamn years for them to animate 5 goddamn episodes. But even I've heard of Junji Ito, a very popular horror manga artist, who's already had things adapted into animes before. Most notably was his collection of short horror stories that were turned into a Netflix anthology. Also this anime about fish that grow legs and start attacking everybody, which sounds fucking hilarious. Uzumaki is a manga from the late 90s that tells the story of a small fictional town plagued by supernatural curses that all involve spirals. Uzumaki translating to either spiral or whirlpool, which is, fun fact, where Naruto Uzumaki gets his name from. But unlike Naruto, there is nothing upbeat in this story, which is one of the reasons Junji Ito thought the idea worked so well. It takes a positive symbol in Japanese media and turns it into the dark and terrible force plaguing this town. The adaptation is only 4 episodes long, and watching the first episode I was really enjoying it. I thought it was super fucking creepy, and I found it so interesting I went and read the rest of the manga. Now the reason it's so bad has nothing to do with the source material, but rather the animation. Notably, the heavy drop in quality between episode 1 and episode 2. This video will be going through all 4 episodes of the anime while comparing and referencing the original source material, and my hope is to explain to you by the end of it why the animation isn't the only thing that caused it to fail. Before we get started, make sure to leave a like to help the video out and consider subscribing. There will be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. Now let's get into this beautiful, beautiful Jesus Christ. Episode 1 opens with a girl walking down a mountainside. Her name is Kirie Goshima, but to avoid sounding like a Canadian, I'm just calling her Kiri, and she's our main character throughout Uzumaki. She lives in a town called Kurozucho, which according to the internet means Black Vortex Town. Do with that info what you will. We meet her boyfriend Suichi Saito at the train station. While walking home, Suichi discusses the idea of leaving the town together. He explains all the weird shit he's seen going on, whirlwinds and whirlpools all over the place, and the fact his dad is going mad over his spiral obsession, spending all day in his study staring at spirals, needing to spin his soup into a whirlpool to eat it, even needing his baths to be spun into a whirlpool. The creepiest of these things being that he can spin his eyes independently of each other, and will often do this while staring at his spirals. Like the relatable protagonist Kiri is, she too tries to spin her eyes independently like you just did watching this video. Suichi also makes note of the sinister lighthouse and walks off mumbling to himself. It's very obvious Kiri doesn't really know what the fuck is going on right now. So relatable, bestie. From this first few minutes, we can see the art style they're going for is very stylized, looking practically like a manga panel, including being completely black and white. And I honestly was really digging this style. The black and white made me feel like I was watching an old eerie horror movie like Night of the Living Dead or something. Kiri gets home and finds her boyfriend's father, Mr. Saito, talking to her father, who makes ceramics for a living. He wants to commission an art piece to fuel his spiral obsession, and goes on about how amazing spirals are. So far, minus a scene or two, the anime and manga have been pretty similar up to this point. The main difference we will see throughout the anime from this point on has to do with the order of events. The manga, which came out in chapters, usually tells a self-contained story of some creepy shit happening. The anime, however, takes these chapters and intertwines them together, touching on multiple beats in the story at the same time, which makes sense. The anime will only be 4 episodes long, meaning if they want any chance of adapting the 20 chapters, they have to move through the story at a faster pace, and mixing the events of chapters together is a solid way to accomplish this, though sometimes it can feel a bit jarring from scene to scene. And there are instances where context is missing or changed from the original source material that I feel takes away quite a bit. We now jump to later at school. Kiri is talking to her friend Azami Koritani, who has a crescent-shaped scar on her forehead from when she hurt herself as a kid. She claims that ever since she got that scar, every boy she's ever liked has had a crush on her back. Both Kiri's boyfriend and Azami use the train station to get to and from school, so Kiri decides to introduce the two. Suichi is immediately terrified of Azami and runs off with Kiri, telling her Azami is a spiral. We have no idea what that means, and so far, it just sounds like this dude could be as crazy as his dad. Later, Kiri is delivering the custom ceramic commission to Suichi's father, though he says he doesn't need it anymore, because he's figured out how to make his own spirals. My reaction exactly, bestie. Kiri runs off just as another commission arrives, and we cut to Shuichi, who's been found by Azami in the streets. She's confused at why every guy she's ever known has been into her, but he isn't, and is now obsessed with him for that reason. Shuichi can sense something on her forehead, and as she starts explaining the scar, it's revealed to no longer be a crescent shape, but a spiral. Shuichi tells her she needs to get out of town or something bad will happen, before running off with the best fucking strut I've ever seen in all of anime. We then cut to Mr. Saito's funeral. The cover story is he fell down the stairs. In reality, he ordered a tub to cram into to make himself into a spiral, which is the state that his wife and son found him in. Dear God, there seems to have been an escalation. As he's cremated, the smoke in the sky begins to form into a spiral shape, which starts to settle into Dragonfly Pond. Shuichi's mother freaks out, claiming she can see his father in the smoke. One of the great shots in this anime. Look at that shit, fucking terrifying. This incident is the final straw that mentally breaks her, and as she's taken away in an ambulance and hospitalized, Azami shows up, and a whirlwind rolls by, revealing a massive fucking spiral-shaped hole in her forehead before she runs off. This whole reveal is perfectly done. It's definitely an unexpected escalation. The wind, the music, it truly is horrifying to see a spiral cavern in this girl's head with no explanation. We cut to school on a rainy day. Azami hasn't been showing up. Just as we think she's arrived, about to reveal another horrible development, we are instead greeted by a slime-covered child by the name of Katayama, who's shown up completely drenched and late to class. He apparently has only been showing up on rainy days as well. One of his classmates makes a joke about him being slower than a snail. Sometimes foreshadowing can be quite obvious. After losing volleyball because of how slow Katayama is, his classmates strip him in the locker room and drag him into the hall. When he rolls over, it's revealed he has a spiral-shaped pattern forming on his back, almost like a snail. At the hospital, Shuichi's mom has only gotten worse, shaving her head in fear of the spiral shape it makes, and even cutting off the tips of her fingers to get rid of the fingerprints. Later that night, Kiri runs into Azami and approaches her, worried that she hasn't been showing up to school. Azami says her eye isn't able to focus and asks Kiri to take a look. This is where we get one of the most terrifying images in all of Uzumaki. As Azami takes off her hat, it's revealed the spiral has gotten even larger, hollowing out most of her head and sucking one of her eyeballs into whatever type of otherworldly void is causing it. Kiri, like the base protagonist she is, freaks the fuck out. Valid. We cut to Shuichi in a park, brought there by one of Azami's admirers under false pretense. When he realizes Azami wants nothing to do with him, he snatches her hat off, revealing the entirety of her upper head engulfed by the spiral. When he gets too close, he is then sucked into her and basically vored. Shuichi calls out to Kiri, and they both watch in horror as Azami is completely consumed by the spiral, vanishing without a trace. And that is how the first episode ends. Now, looking at it in its entirety, there's a lot going on here, and it's pretty horrifying for the most part. What's worse is there's almost no rhyme or reason behind the incidents we've seen so far, nor any real way to connect them besides the spirals themselves. We can say what happened to Mr. Saito could represent the consuming nature of obsession, as his obsession to spirals drove him to madness. Maybe Azami could be said to embody that same obsession, though directed towards Shuichi instead of spirals. Azami was liked by every guy she's ever met, but wants none of them. She becomes obsessed with the one guy who doesn't feel the same way, and that obsession literally devours her. This theme is actually supported even more in the source material, where instead of meeting in a random alley, Azami shows up to Shuichi's house, breaks in, and has the conversation with him as he's cowering on the floor in the hallway. Azami also doesn't show up at the funeral because that was chapters beforehand, and she's not very polite with Kiri. She actually has a confrontation about her obsession over Shuichi. Now, as always, my 3 brain cells feel very confident about the words I'm saying right now. But then we get to Katayama. Katayama has absolutely nothing in common with the other 2 stories so far. His fate isn't complete, and we won't actually see his story conclude until episode 2. But so far, there's nothing of his story that correlates to the other 2. For instance, he doesn't show any signs of obsession. You could maybe argue he has an obsession with rain, but if that were the case, why would he still be coming to school on rainy days instead of missing school to obsess over the rain? I already know the rain isn't an obsession, mainly because I finished the 2nd episode, and I know what the purpose of the rain actually is, but we'll get to that. In the the manga, Katayama's story is introduced and concluded in chapter 8, quite a bit later than a lot of what we've seen so far, as most of this first episode focused on Mr. Saito's spiral into madness, his death, and the aftermath of his funeral, which all take place in the first 2 chapters. It makes sense, those are the chronological events in the manga, but we're introduced to Katayama and don't really get to see the progression of his story at all, getting less than 2 minutes of runtime focused on it, basically just setting it up for the next episode. I feel like that's 2 minutes that could have been better spent completing Miss Saito's story, which we still haven't seen in the anime. One could say they threw in Katayama to help speed up the story progression by introducing the next thread sooner than later, which is fair, but I still feel like it could have been done better, and I'll show how after we get through the second episode. So far, I haven't had too many gripes with the animation, and with the simple shading style, it's actually pretty hard to tell when 3D is being used based off the lighting. Usually when 3D is used in animation, there's obvious shading differences because you're not going to be able to easily create 3D lighting that perfectly matches the not real and non-existent lighting accomplished by shading on a 2D image. Sometimes it's worse than others in anime, but other times it can add to the animation quite well. Originally, it was announced a company named Drive would be the animation team working on this show, but the credits for the first episode are to a company called Fugaku Inc. Looking into them, I couldn't really find any well-known projects they've worked on, and whenever they are listed on stuff, Drive is also listed, so there's probably some causation there, but I wouldn't know. I don't know shit about Japanese animation companies, but I did think overall the animation team on this episode did quite well. They did a great job capturing the essence of these terrifying manga panels. Too bad they got fired. No one knows exactly what the fuck happened, but when episode 2 dropped, people were appalled by the insane drop in quality. Uzumaki was announced to be in production back in 2019, with teasers being shown in early 2020. The original director said the COVID pandemic hadn't at all affected production, though he later admitted in an interview the pandemic did force the team to restructure their original plan entirely, with no details on what exactly that meant. He also announced the show would be delayed till October 2022, and it was delayed even further to late 2023, and finally actually dropped at the end of this September 2024. Over 5 years of production, being given hope with an amazing first episode, just for that hope to be smashed when episode 2 dropped. The executive producer for the show, Jason DeMarco, said in a now deleted social media post that he can't talk about what happened, but that they were, quote, screwed over, and that their options were A, not finish the show and air nothing, B, finish and air the first episode, leaving the show incomplete, or C, run all 4, warts and all. Obviously they chose option C, and dear God does it show. Compared to episode 1, we will be stopping a lot to admire the animation quality. Episode 2 opens on another rainy day. Katayama arrives late again, and this time he has some sort of spiral-shaped growth bulging out of his back. The massive decline in animation quality is already very noticeable. From a shot-to-shot comparison of the first episode, it's almost criminal how bad they butchered such a beautiful art style. Not to mention, Katayama's entire character is supposed to be slow. He's turning into a snail, very obviously by this point. Look at this motherfucker yapping, and some of these frames are just so jarringly different. Details are also just outright missing. There's not a drop of rain or slime on this kid. Like the base protagonist she is, Kiri laments the drop in quality before we cut to the title card, which I didn't mention in episode 1, mainly because I wanted to make fun of the fact you can recreate this effect pretty easily in Premiere Pro using the twirl effect. We cut to some rundown buildings known as row houses. 2 teenagers lay together inside. Their names are Kazunori and Yuriko. The two's loving embrace is interrupted by the sight of 2 snakes coiled together like a spiral. The girl thinks they're fighting like their parents always are, but the boy recognizes they are actually mating before the snakes fall through a hole in the floor. We then cut to Kiri walking through the graveyard with one of her classmates, Shiho. Shiho notes that no one knows what happened to Azami, and that the town has started burying people again due to everyone cremated causing the same spiral smoke pattern in the sky that happened at Mr. Saito's funeral. This scene suffers from what I like to call the popsicle stick effect. One of the worst cases of the popsicle stick effect I've seen in recent years comes from the cartoon Invincible. Overall, Invincible is a great show and has a very passable art style. Come to think of it, that show also got me to read the rest of the comics because it was so good. But during Mark Grayson's first flight in his new suit, there's a shot of him flying over a body of water next to a bridge. And oh my god, do you see what I mean? I can literally cut him out in Photoshop, tape a popsicle stick to him, and achieve the same effect. An anime can suffer from this same effect, but usually it's with close-up walking shots, because otherwise you'd actually have to draw legs doing things. Unfortunately, besides a few outliers, this is the best we can hope for in this entire episode. It only gets worse from here. While making their way to school in the graveyard, a kid kid pops out and jump scares the girls so badly, they completely freeze frame and fall to the floor, like a weakening fridge magnet sliding down the door. His name is Mitsuru Yamaguchi, and he tells Kiri that he's in love with her. And like the base protagonist Kiri is, she tells him to fuck off. Shiho says this is why everyone calls him Jack in the Box, and he says that's just what he does. He loves jumping out and scaring people. New scene. Kiri stumbles onto the two teenagers in a fight with Yuriko's father and brother, who, made obvious by the shoving, disapprove of their love. Kazunori takes the slowest right hook since the sped games, the quality of which is so dubious, I'm probably in more pain than he is just having to watch it. Yuriko is dragged off by her family as Kiri goes to check on Kazunori. The two have a conversation about how twisted both his and his lover's families are. They both live in the same rundown row house, basically wall to wall, but hate each other as a way of coping with the poverty they both suffer. He has hope that him and Yuriko are not yet as twisted as their family are, and they plan to run away together by train the day after tomorrow. I don't feel like this lover's story is done as well as it is in the manga. We could have included more lines that explain exactly why the hate exists between the two families. Basically, they're both poor and both see each other as trash people. Why would you want your daughter dating a trash person's son? Obviously, this is very hypocritical, since they're both in poverty, both living in the same shacks, both jobless in the manga. They could have thrown in some lines where the brother called him poor or some shit before slapping him upside the head with that slow ass punch, but I digress. We cut to the hospital. Miss Saito is still not doing great, and Suichi and Kiri have a conversation about the two lovers. Suichi believes those row houses to be cursed by the spiral, and that anyone living in them will have their soul twisted. He thinks the spiral is slowly infecting the entire town, showing a random image of a dead kid, who I know from the manga fell off the school building, dying with a grim smile on his face. He also says Kiri's hair is getting longer, because how else are we going to transition into the next story thread? We cut to Kiri at school, and her hair has started to curl at the ends. Her classmate Kyoko offers to braid them, but later in class the braids undo themselves, and her hair curls back into spirals. At this same time, Katayama is seen crawling up the side of the building, almost completely transformed into a snail, with the only human features left being the rough shape of his head. Like the relatable protagonist Kiri is, she gets the fuck out of there right away. This scene is only slightly horrifying. It was definitely underwhelming due to the animation cuts, and we actually miss out on an entire stage of transformation in the manga, where Katayama crawls into class while still having arms and climbs into his seat. Though that would have been crazy to see, I think it does make more sense to drop the snail transformation on them as quickly as possible, because this scene would be even less interesting if we already saw him crawling into the room in snail form. Kiri heads to a salon to get her hair cut, and it fails miserably, with her hair starting to attack the stylist. Another main issue that's very prominent throughout the poor animation is there's sometimes an instant jump from one piece of animation to the next, with nothing connecting the two. For instance, the stylist is about to cut her hair, it's all curled up, then the next frame, there are no curls, and the hair starts to wrap itself around her. The entire episode is basically just one big continuity error, and we'll see more throughout. I'd also like to point out, this mirror is inconsistent as fuck. First off, it doesn't look mirrored at all, just a slightly different head. Second, the hair isn't the same. Why would you waste your time animating that when clearly there's much more to worry about? After going home, her hair tries to strangle her before hypnotizing her family. It also now stands straight up into the air, and later at school begins to hypnotize other people, and Kyoko becomes jealous of the attention she's getting. We get a scene where the bully who stripped Katayama seems quite into Kiri's hair. His name is Sumura, by the way, and Kiri goes to check on Katayama, who's being kept in a cage on the school grounds. She overhears the teacher trying to explain to Katayama's parents that their son is now a snail, and at this point he's lost all signs of humanity, and his parents don't believe he's their son, leaving him at the school. The next scene cuts to the kids leaving school, Sumura trailing behind everybody looking quite slimy himself. Kiri heads to the train station, and while everyone is mesmerized by her hair, Suichi runs off like a goddamn goblin that needs to take a shit. New scene. Yamaguchi pops out of nowhere and gives Kiri a present as a token of his love. She rejects him, reiterating that she has a boyfriend. He responds like any normal person would and jumps in front of a moving vehicle, saying his love will stop the car. He is then run over off screen as Kiri just stares. No flinch or anything, she just like raw dogs that shit, like it's a staring contest or something. Yamaguchi dies lodged inside the wheel well of the car, still holding the present meant for Kiri, which opens up into a jack-in-the-box. We cut back to the school and see another snail crawling along the wall. At first, it's assumed to be Katayama, who must have escaped his cage, but upon closer inspection, the students realize that it's actually Sumura, who is also turned into a snail. They put him in the same cage as Katayama, and because snails are hermaphrodites, they begin to have passionate relations right there in front of everybody. Unlike in the manga, no one says shit about what they're witnessing, because we don't have time for that. We gotta move on to the next story beat. Kyoko shows shows up and also has crazy spiral hair. She says not only is she better than Kiri, but that there can only be one girl who's the center of attention. They get into a stale-ass Medusa hair fight until Shuichi intervenes and cuts a lock of Kyoko's hair as it's trying to strangle Kiri, only to be engulfed by her hair after trying to cut it as well. Feeling like she's won the battle, Kyoko struts off into town, with the majority of this episode's budget being spent on her hip sway. Shuichi cuts his way out of Kiri's hair, cutting off as much as possible. And while Kyoko struts through town, high off the attention she's getting from her spiral hair, she begins to look more and more drained. Shuichi wakes up Kiri after cutting all her hair off, and they both overhear that the two snail kids have escaped. They follow the snail trail into the mountains and discover their teacher, Mr. Yokota, has found the snails have laid eggs. He starts to smash all of them, saying they'd caused the town to panic, and justifies the killing of their offspring by saying they aren't even human anymore. Because the pacing of this episode is breakneck, after seeing and hearing all this, Kiri then goes, "Oh yeah, those two kids were running away together. We gotta get over to the train station." It just feels so insane how quickly our characters just forget about the last thing that happened and move on to another plot point. And it's because those plot points we're moving to are from completely separate chapters that were originally self-contained. I felt like the pacing of the first episode was fine. The one thing I would change is either to finish up Miss Saito's story, which, spoiler alert, is her killing herself in the hospital, and or to end the Katayama bit with the first part we see in episode 2, letting us see the snail shell starting to form on his back. That small addition could have made Katayama feel less like an afterthought in the first episode. Despite that, the pacing in the first episode is fine, while the pacing in the second episode is way too damn fast and without solid ties to intertwine all the stories. At the train station, the two lovers show up, explaining they're being chased by their family, who spotted them sneaking out of the house. They decide to cut through the beach, even though the establishing shot showed they were already at the train station. By the way, I went back and checked, and yeah, this is an error. They were all going to meet up and then go to the train station, so this establishing shot shouldn't be here. This chase scene is where we get some of the worst animation in the entire episode. Every time these fuckers run, it gets worse and worse. Like a limping dog trying to reach the tree it plans on dying under. The animators are just giving up more and more each second that passes. And we still have 10 minutes left. And 2 entire episodes of apparently this quality or worse. God help us. They start running down the stairs to the beach, and we can see some perfectly drawn brick patterns someone accidentally laid on top of the stairs instead of behind them. It's just insane this made it into an actual anime. What the fuck? After another amazing chase scene, the couple falls after running about 15 feet. Kazunori gets another taste of that sped knuckle sandwich before taking a dive not even wrestling fans would buy. Not wanting to be separated again, the lovers instead decide to twist and contort their bodies together like the snakes they saw in the row house. The spiral's influence on their families have pushed them to twist their own bodies just as it's twisted their families' hearts. They explain that they'll now be together forever before slithering off into the ocean, never to be seen again. Oh, I lied, there they are. Oh, never mind, they're gone. This scene looked okay, but it's still very noticeable how much we missed out on due to the drop in animation quality. For instance, they twist their own bodies, they coil their hands together, but their bodies are still separated. We then cut to them completely coiled together, their heads being the only human aspect left throughout the middle of the coil. It would have been pretty horrifying to see that act animated. At least here, for these couple seconds, it looks like they tried to animate it, unlike the entire hair plot, which not only did we not see like any motion at all with their Medusa hair, as the chapter is called, but we don't even get to see Kyoko die, which is what happens. Her hair sucks the soul out of her and leaves her body tied to a telephone pole. This episode is also 27 minutes long, and we couldn't shove in that 15 to 20 seconds of her dying. We transition to a shot of the black lighthouse, abandoned for years, for some reason shining across the city, before cutting to day. As Kiri is walking down the street, she sees an old woman who says she's trying to get home, as she aimlessly walks in a circle. Because Kiri is a base protagonist, she looks just as confused as we'd expect. We see the same thing happen to a number of people in town, and in class, people are speculating about the lighthouse before the door opens, and Mr. Yokota, now transforming into a snail person, crawls into class. With that, the snail arc, as I will call it, is complete. The episode is now exactly the same length as the first, yet like the entrancing shape of the spiral, this shit refuses to stop. We cut to the beach. Men are talking about a ship that ran aground, which if you didn't know is sailor talk for ate shit. The crew were apparently seen walking in circles before falling overboard and drowning. The men also explain that 5 experts were sent to check out the lighthouse the night before, and no one knows what happened to them. Kiri's brother and some friends run into the lighthouse, and she follows after them. She climbs for what feels like forever before stumbling across 5 crispy corpses. After finding 2 of her brother's friends and sending them back down, she heads to the top of the lighthouse and finds her brother and one of his friends staring fearfully at the lighthouse's lens, which has somehow been warped and distorted into a spiral pattern. Kiri realizes the heat from the lens has to be what fried the workers who went to investigate it. As the sun sets over the horizon, the three of them frantically book it down the lighthouse, and when the beam kicks on, nameless boy number 3 trips and is burned alive. This might have been scary if we could actually see anything. The episode ends with Kiri and her brother tumbling down the stairs. That's it. That's just how the episode ends. The shot of the lighthouse's beam shining over the town. I know the reason we end exactly at this point is to try to make the final scene a cliffhanger, but in reality what actually happens is Kiri and her brother get out of the lighthouse with burns and end up in the hospital, which is actually the catalyst for the next couple chapters. We also get a teaser of the Jack-in-the-Box kid at the way end, which looked promising, but you already know they're gonna fuck it up bad. This episode fits in 5 different stories at once, which is a lot, and you can really feel it throughout. Compared to the first episode, which fit in 2 stories and threw a little bit of the snail chapter in, episode 2 is an entire mess, and is nowhere near as well written as the first was. To avoid content ID, which is the automated system on YouTube to check for copyrighted content, clips shown need to be less than 6 seconds, which means I need to cut things very carefully as to not be wrongfully copyright striked for my fair use video, but also to prevent the visuals from being too jarring for the viewer, like single frames being left in or something. For episode 2, this was extremely hard to do, not only because it already felt jarring since continuity is non-existent from cut to cut, but because I shit you not, almost no actual piece of animation throughout the entire episode is even 6 seconds long, and therefore I had to mess with the speed to get shit to even reach 4 seconds sometimes. Because of the editing style required to review this show, I cannot visually describe to you the whiplash felt when actually watching it, because to do so I'd have to show you 10 seconds unedited, in which we'd get through 4 different cuts of animation that do not line up before I'm promptly banned off the platform. When looking at the different curse stories throughout the episode, we can see a few patterns in how they could relate, with the main link connecting all of them still being the motif of spirals. For the snail story, whatever happened to Katayama spread to Sumura, which then spread to their teacher Mr. Yakoda. The transformation into a snail indicates a complete loss of humanity, and while I still have no idea how or why the fuck Katayama first transformed into a snail, we could maybe say the reason the other two did is because of their inhumane treatment of others around them. Sumura was a bully, not only humiliating Katayama in human form, but making fun of him even after he transformed, and the manga directly saying he doesn't care because Katayama isn't human anymore. Mr. Yakoda, upon finding the snail's eggs, destroys all of them, justifying it by saying that the snails aren't even human. This dehumanization could have been the start of their loss of humanity that caused them to turn into snails as well. The lover's story seems to have more to do with the row houses than anything else, as they appear to be a source or an amplifier of the spiral curse. While it manifested in the attitudes and behaviors of the lovers' families, it manifested physically in them. The hair, I have no idea why the fuck it started, but Kyoko is consumed with jealousy over the attention Kiri's getting, jealousy being a type of obsession, and ultimately, she is killed by the thing she needed to gain and keep all that attention, the hair literally draining the life out of her. Some people speculate that this chapter had something to do with Japanese beauty standards or the Japanese fat tax. I don't know shit about Japanese beauty standards, and the fat tax wasn't implemented till 10 years after this was written, so we're just gonna move on. The Jack-in-the-Box kid can also be read as another obsession story, Kiri being the thing he's obsessed with, and that obsession leading him to his death. His story isn't finished yet, but we can already see the themes lining up, and something to do with Jack-in-the-Boxes, maybe the spiral motif being the springs they sit atop. The Black Lighthouse doesn't necessarily fit with any of the other stories, and is more so a device to further along other plots. The rays it shines upon the town is what causes people in this episode to start walking in circles, and in later chapters, do some other fuck shit. In the grand scheme of things, like Suichi's father or Izami, the lighthouse is less important than the story it furthers, that being the downward spiral of the town. Now we move on to episode 3. We open at the hospital to our base protagonist lying in bed. After the incident in the lighthouse, she's recovering from the burn she received. Suichi tells Kiri of his mother almost learning that there's actually spirals in her ear, which would surely drive her mad again. The two notice a spiral of male mosquitoes outside, Suichi asserting it must be the curse. Kiri overhears that 10 more pregnant women have been admitted after suffering thousands of mosquito bites, and because the maternity ward is full, the nurses inform Kiri she'll be sharing a room with her pregnant cousin, Kiiko. She helps her cousin settle in, putting all her belongings in her bedside, including a strangely shaped heavy object wrapped in a towel. While we aren't too sure what's going on, we're set up to see some spooky shit, and after cutting back from the title card, we get a glimpse of Kiri's dad collecting clay from Dragonfly Pond, before cutting back to the hospital, where 3 patients have been found dead, covered in stab wounds and completely drained of blood. Suichi sees a mosquito in Kiri's Kiri's room and sprays it with insecticide, explaining how only female mosquitoes carrying eggs suck blood. For spraying insect killer next to a pergurginate woman, Shuichi is promptly kicked out of the hospital, and that night, Kiri notes a mosquito flying around and tells Kihiko to be careful, which she responds to by saying she actually loves mosquitoes. Not weird at all. Later that same night, Kiri wakes up and finds all the pregnant women walking down the hall of the hospital carrying hand-cranked carpenter drills. They fan out into different rooms, and when Kiri follows one of them, she finds a pergurginate woman drilling a hole in a dude's neck before drinking his blood. In my opinion, this episode adapts some of the creepiest chapters in the entirety of the manga. There's just something that's absolutely terrifying about pregnant women. There's just something really creepy about seeing these pregnant women all working together to murder people in this hospital by hand with drills, drinking their blood. It's creepy all around. And this is despite the drop in animation quality. In fact, yeah, there's bad animation here and there, but it pales in comparison to the main issue with this episode, which we'll get to in a bit. Kiri is spotted by one of the pregnant women, but before she's attacked, another patient walks out and is swarmed by all of them. The women hypnotize him before murdering him as well, and they also get their hands on a nurse. Also, the guy they just killed, his hair changed color from black to white. Very nice. Just as the pregnant women have decided they've feasted enough, they remember Kiri and decide to kill her, since she's seen what they did. Just before she's attacked, she finds the bug spray that Shuichi left behind and sprays it in the face of all the pergurginate women, who leave her alone for the night. Elsewhere in the hospital, Shuichi's mother is sleeping when a centipede tries to crawl its way into her ear. Understandably, she freaks the fuck out, but not as much as she does after it turns itself into a spiral shape and she sees her husband's face. Her husband says she should become part of the spiral with him, and that he wants to crawl into the spiral inside of her ear. We cut to morning. All the pergurginate women look healthy, and Kiri is trying to frantically convince anyone of the events she had just witnessed, but no one believes her story. We then cut back to Shuichi's mother, as she's frantically trying to reach her doctor's office to check the chart on the wall from the other day, but when she gets there, the chart is gone, and the doctor lies and said he removed it because it was outdated. In reality, Shuichi told him ahead of time it could be a problem. When she's brought back to her room, her IV drip starts spiraling into a whirlpool. Her husband's face reappears, telling her about the spirals in her ear again. She freaks the fuck out and stabs herself in the ear, the injury of which causes her to die not much later. She is then cremated, and the smoke spirals in the sky before being sucked into Dragonfly Pond. Now you might be asking yourself, but Jojo, I thought it was established in episode 2 that they stopped cremations and started burying people again because of the smoke spirals. To which I would say, shut the fuck up, I was getting there. The show is only 4 episodes long, while the manga is 20 chapters. To adapt these chapters, they had to be intertwined together so the stories could happen quicker than they did in the manga. The problem is, they did a terrible job at this. Episode 1 covered chapters 1, 2, 3, and 8, while episode 2 covered chapters 5, 6, 7, part of 8, and 9. The problem is, we did not actually finish chapter 2 in episode 1, that being Shuichi's mother dying and turning into smoke. That's why neither of the first 2 episodes could go over chapter 4, the firing effect, because Shuichi's mother hasn't died yet. We are now stuck 11 minutes into episode 3 trying to finish it up. They threw in 2 minutes of Snail Boy instead of just finishing up chapter 2 and maybe starting to touch on chapter 4. Now all this plot is doing in episode 3 is taking away from the tension of the pregnant lady arc. Not only that, but we've completely contradicted previously established lore in the adaptation. The only reason being, it was written poorly, and this plot with the kiln requires that both of Shuichi's parents be cremated, so their smoke goes into Dragonfly Pond. I feel like a 5th grader could have written this better. Off the top of my head, I think luckily this is the only contradiction we have with the writing. Outside of that, the story is definitely suffering from the writing that requires we fit this all in 4 episodes. I honestly feel like, despite animation problems, the pacing could have been a lot better if we had like 5 episodes. Because at the speed this show moves, it literally feels like we don't have time to be afraid of anything. But if we wrote this story better and wasted less time on chapter 2, 4 episodes would have still felt pretty okay. We might have even had more time to see the pregnant ladies start drinking bags of blood, because that's what they did after they got caught. Or the bombastic side eye that Kiri got from one of the babies when she noticed its stomach was bulging. After a shot at Kiri's father, Mr. Goshima, working at his kiln, we cut to the hospital. All the babies have been born and Kiri's snacking on some hospital food when she tries to spit out a mushroom. They didn't even bother animating it, but she was supposed to spit out a mushroom here, saying that it smells like blood. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you, I don't know exactly what blood smells like. I've never been in the presence of such quantity that I can recognize that smell, but Slay Queen. As they walk about the hospital, they overhear the staff absolutely nutting over these mushrooms, saying the obstetrician, that means pergurginate doctor, said they were healthy so everyone can eat as much as they want. It is also worth noting, all the people nutting over it tend to look middle-aged. They go to observe the newborns, which Kiri knows has been nurtured on the blood of humans. The babies sporadically just start talking to each other about how they can't wait to go back to the warm place, and how the doctor is putting one of the babies back right now, before their onesies pop open and a mushroom grows out from their belly buttons. The same spiral mushroom the hospital loves, and that Kiri almost ate earlier. She hears Kiko scream and goes to investigate, finding a room covered in the baby mushrooms. When asked about Kiko, the obstetrician starts talking about how babies' cuteness is a weapon to help them grow to maturity, but that these babies are different, and are so determined to get back into the womb that they keep regrowing the umbilical cord and placenta. That's right, that's a placenta mushroom head. Fucking appalling. Shuichi runs past the doctor and finds Kiri's cousin wearing Jojo brand nipple pasties. She's been cut open and her baby placed back inside her womb, then stitched back up. Jesus fucking Christ. Because she is now carrying the baby again, she needs more blood, and since Shuichi is not actually supposed to be here in the source material, he is thrown aside like a used condom, so the doctor can hold Kiri at vampire point. But Jojo, you might be asking, how is she going to drink any blood without her trusty bloodletting drill? She's revealed to have a tongue like a mosquito's mouth, which she uses to stab the doctor instead of Kiri, and begins to drain his blood. Shuichi exists again all of a sudden, and they both get the fuck out of there, as nurses come in to eat the mushroom, and Kiko looks for more blood. And this is where the mosquito arc comes to an end. In the manga, this really felt like a turning point in the story, as everything begins to go to shit, and nothing, including mosquito vampire women, really matters anymore. But in the anime, we still need to finish chapter 4, which feels much more out of place since we're going straight from pergurginate women sucking people's blood back to slice of life with a twist. If the stories were a chart, this is what it would generally look like from chapter to chapter. We are increasing the what the fuck meter and ramping higher and higher. This is what the anime's chart would look like. Going back to chapter 4 out of nowhere just kills the momentum entirely. While walking Kiri home from the hospital, her mother tells Shuichi they'll be having him over for dinner. Now this technically works, but in the manga the context of him coming over for dinner is that both his parents are dead and he's been bed rotting and starving himself. That's why he looks all bony in the face. In the anime he literally looks fine 2 seconds earlier, but then again we're never really told how much time has passed between these black frames that show up to separate scenes. While eating, Shuichi sees the plate he has is covered in spirals and freaks out. Kiri's father begins to go on a spiral rant saying Mr. Saito was a genius, and when inspecting some of his pottery, Kiri notices faces on him. Faces she says looks like Shuichi's parents. We see screaming spiral shapes as we cut to Mr. Goshima staring intently into the kiln. Shuichi says he can hear voices calling from inside, and after hearing his parents' voices begging for help, he picks up a brick and lobs it at the kiln. Because we have no animators, the brick explodes on impact, before we cut to the insulator bricks sort of toppling over. Clay filled with spiral souls begins flying out of the kiln while Mr. Goshima and Shuichi escape the cottage before it is engulfed in exactly 3 fire PNGs. And just like yanking the final tooth root loose, we finally finished chapter 4, the effort of which has nearly given me a brain aneurysm. And now the real turning point for the anime can start, as we begin the adaptation of chapter 12, The Storm. We cut straight from the cottage fire to strong rain washing over the city. Mr. Goshima is repairing holes in the roof when Kiri tells him to come inside. Her umbrella is swept off by the wind, and as she looks up, she can visibly see the eye of the storm above her, being at most a few blocks wide. We cut to Kiri's family listening to a news broadcast saying meteorologists have no idea why the storm has parked itself directly on top of the town and hasn't moved. The broadcaster is then cut off mid-explanation, literally like mid-sentence, and we cut to a news reporter in the storm and are finally, 19 minutes into episode 3, shown the fate of the spiral hair girl. She is dead with her hair wrapped around the pole, like in the manga, but for some reason most of her hair is no longer wrapped around the pole and is just sort of dangling there. We did not need this. This does not intertwine the stories. All it does is leave a disconnected plot thread that needed to be closed later with practically no context around it. In fact, this makes literally no sense. How much time has passed since this bitch died? Their teacher turned into a snail, which in universe had to have taken a couple of days. Kiri went and scaled the lighthouse. She then spent a while recovering in the hospital, witnessed pregnant ladies eating people, the babies born from these women shoved back in the womb, all before going home, eating these shitty looking noodles before the kiln cottage burns down. And you're telling me this bitch has been lying here dead for that entire time and no one did anything about it? No one thought to move her body that has to have been mummifying on the fucking power line for at least weeks. My god. No one at all makes any other note about the dead hair girl as we start hearing Kiri's name being whispered by someone. Her brother tells her the storm is looking for her. The doorbell rings and it's Shuichi who tells Kiri to come with him into the storm. He tells her she needs to leave or her house will be destroyed because the storm seems to be obsessed with her, whispering her name as the eye sits right atop their house. The storm uses a Naruto-esque almighty push to knock over some buildings onto Kiri, and when a woman who looks exactly like her tries to help, she is sucked into the eye in probably the goofiest looking animation of the entire episode. She is literally doing a little jig up there. The storm spits the lady back out and she splats on the ground. They deduce the storm must have grabbed the lady because it mistook her for Kiri as they hide beneath an overpass. After a log lightly brushes against this mirror sign, completely KOing it, their hiding spot is compromised. They see a storm drain and decide to go underground to escape, but are greeted by whirlpools that spin up and throw them into the air. The two are sucked into the eye, and we get a shot of the storm swirling around Dragonfly Pond, then a shot of the two of them lying on the ground. That's right, we literally go from this to this in 3 seconds. God, I missed the animation of the first episode. It's revealed that all the houses surrounding the pond have been destroyed, including Kiri's. I want to make sure everyone understands the typhoon was sucked into the pond. The anime doesn't make that very clear because for some reason we do not get any voiceovers, and since we lack an animation team, we just kind of cut to the storm being gone. The storm sequence suffered horrendously from the animation quality, and even though all the pieces are in place for it to play out like it did in the manga, they just said, fuck it, it's an adaptation after all, and proceeded to take a massive shit on it. In the manga, the way this plays out is similar, but we start with Kiri and Shuichi on the beach as Shuichi recognizes the signs of a typhoon and proceeds to run through town like a freaking maniac, warning everybody. After learning the hurricane has stopped directly on the town, and Kiri losing her umbrella and seeing the eye of the storm, she hears it calling out her name at night, and the next morning she heads out to bring Shuichi his dinner, and that's why she's outside, in a raincoat. We also get this amazing panel of Shuichi posted the fuck up, asking her what the fuck she's doing outside. He heard the storm calling her name as well, and they both run for it. In the anime, Shuichi is the one who brings her outside and into danger, which makes no sense at all. He says her house will be destroyed if she doesn't leave, but her house was destroyed, and her entire family is fine. And the woman who gets sucked up in the manga doesn't actually look like Kiri. She's just a woman in a raincoat, which Kiri is also wearing. In the anime, Kiri was basically dragged outside, and this random woman who appears out of nowhere is also coatless. And I think I know why. Keyword, think. Remember, I'm just some dumbass on the internet making videos for entertainment purposes. Basically, what I think is going on is that most of the characters in these scenes are traced 3D models. This would explain why no one got raincoats, because they're just using the same 3D model for multiple scenes and didn't want to deal with trying to get a raincoat on a model. Now this might seem like a small issue, but in reality it fucked up the entire way this chase plays out, because we aren't willing to animate a raincoat. Kiri is pulled into the storm by Shuichi, which makes no sense at all, and also means we don't get this bomb-ass frame of him posted the fuck up. Because of this lack of raincoat, we've now created a situation where Shuichi is actually putting Kiri in danger. Also, where the fuck are they even running? He took her away from the house, which is presumably where they were running to in the manga. So where the fuck are we going? I also have to note that this is the turning point where this show no longer can be considered horror, because the bad animation is so terrible, it takes away from any sense of dread and completely kills the entire vibe. Having read through the manga, it's just really sad to see what has come of this show, and I cannot imagine how Junji Ito must feel witnessing how they've massacred his boy. We cut to a shot of the row houses, which are the rundown poor people houses from episode 2, specifically the Twisted Souls lover plot. This is where Kiri's family must stay now since the hurricane destroyed all the houses near Dragonfly Pond, including her family's. Shuichi is here too, I guess. I really don't understand why we're just making him here for things he wasn't a part of. Also, I have no idea what the fuck is going on with her dad's face, but it looks terrible. They all wonder why exactly the row house in its poor condition didn't seem to be affected by the typhoon, and we get a glance through a peephole where someone is staring creepily at Kiri. The family hears some strange moaning sounds before there's a knock at the door and a neighbor stops by. Mr. Wakabayashi. He looks fucking horrendous as he tells of the other neighbors, an old woman and her her son, who has some sort of disease that causes him to cry out in pain at night. He then just leaves. He only came by to give that tidbit because we don't have time for him to tell them in a natural way like in the manga. While trying to sleep, Kiri hears crying, not from the son but from the mother. She goes with Shuichi to check on them and finds the mother crying in the entry to the home, covered in either spiral warts or some other kind of skin growth. She says that her son is dead, and Kiri takes a look in the room before screaming. We cut to the son's body being removed by paramedics and the neighbor Wakabayashi asking Kiri what she saw. He said he peeked in the back window and saw tons of holes in the ground where the son would have slept. Like the base protagonist she is, Kiri is made quite uncomfortable by the situation and tells him to fuck off. We see that it was Mr. Wakabayashi spying on Kiri, having a perverted attraction to her. He looks down at his hands and sees he's covered in the same spiral growths as the mother and the son were. As the storm rages on, Kiri's brother points out weird spiral growths coming from the wall before it bursts open, revealing that Mr. Wakabayashi is covered in massive spiral horns, looking like a fell omen. After picking up the most sped rat I've ever seen, he gulps it down almost instantly and starts heading for Kiri. Stumbling outside, she's about to get nommed on before a pole flying through the storm nails the next door pervert right through the head, sending him flying away until the crossfade on his PNG is finished, and he vanishes into the night. It's just all so bad, but I promise you, it does not even compare to the next scene. The boys all tackle Kiri, I presume to keep her from flying away, before they notice someone in the distance bouncing. She immediately recognizes him as Mitsuru Yamaguchi, the kid who used to jump out and scare her before jumping in front of a car to prove his love to her. This is about the stupidest way you could mix the Jack-in-the-Box plot back into the story. In the manga, after Yamaguchi's funeral, Kiri opens his present, which turns out to be a Jack-in-the-Box. In the anime, the box just opens after he's run over and killed, never actually making it into Kiri's hands. But in the manga, the Jack-in-the-Box taunts her, saying it's her fault Yamaguchi was run over, and that he'll come back for her. Kiri and Shuichi then head to the graveyard to stake Yamaguchi's heart in hopes of preventing any undead shenanigans. This is when he springs out of his coffin and chases the pair through the graveyard, bouncing after them rather than running. His body is so rotten it falls apart more and more until his lower half has completely fallen off. As his body lays there, they believe the chase is over, before he pulls himself back up and begins chasing them again, somehow still bouncing towards them. As his body continues falling apart with each bounce, it's revealed he has a spring inside of him. He lunges at them one last time, and just as it looks like this will be the leap that reaches Kiri, he misses and splats dead on the ground, the spring bouncing free of his rotting carcass. Shuichi realizes that the spring was actually the suspension of the car that ran Yamaguchi over. When his body had to be cut out of the wheel well using a blowtorch, they left the spring inside of him, but now that it's fallen out and he lays in pieces, they are sure he'll never be back to haunt them again. Now, why did I just spoil the entire ending of this chapter for you before I show you the anime adaptation? Because the adaptation is so bad that I had to give you 50 cc's of solid horror before I hit you with this absolute abomination. Yamaguchi hops towards them before his guts fall out, his legs fall off, and he falls to the ground. He then looks up and we cut to him bouncing on the spring. He then jumps at the stationary targets of Kiri and Shuichi, misses, and splats on the ground. The spring falls out of the corpse and Shuichi goes, "I think that's the suspension from a car," and the episode ends. I cannot imagine writing something as bomb-ass as Uzumaki just to witness it get absolutely shredded to pieces by production issues, and for this to be the final outcome. The worst part is, the animation isn't even the only problem with this part. It's the fact this plot is just thrown in here, completely disconnected from any context. This corpse is able to hop around in the storm without being blown away, and he was able to hop all the way here without falling apart. How long has he been resurrected and hopping around? In the teaser, there was no storm when he popped out of the grave. This is the second storm. Does this mean he's been jumping around 2 storms without anyone noticing or him falling apart? They also adapted the very suspenseful "I think it's over" part of the scene into him just laying there for a couple seconds before getting up again. No actual jump scare at all. It's insane. Listen, I'm not a writer. I'm not gonna pretend I could write something as cool as Ito's source material, but I'd like to think I do have a few brain cells up there, and if I was asked to adapt his source material into something that could fit into 4 episodes, at this point in the show, I'm pretty confident I could manage that better than what we have here. Trying to break any of this down is pretty rough. The pregnant women eating people is fucking insane and was caused by thousands of mosquito bites the women received. We're told how the male mosquitoes swarm in a spiral when looking for a mate, and at this point it's pretty clear that spirals are more than just a motif. They are actually a means through which the curse finds ways to affect the town. There is nothing inherently related between the previous plots and the pregnant women or the newborns, but the spiral nature that exists in mosquitoes was the means by which the curse found its way into the pregnant women. The umbilical cord of a baby also grows in the spiral shape, so the curse was able to find its hold in them as well, with everyone who chose to eat the mushrooms becoming obsessed with them. This can also bridge the gap between what looks like obsession as a main theme of the spirals and the snail story that didn't seem to have much in common with it. Snails naturally have spiral patterns on their shells, which is why snails are a way people can be affected by the curse. Kiri's hair was getting longer, and sometimes when hair gets longer it starts to curl at the ends, which could have been a naturally occurring spiral the curse was able to latch onto. All the other curses to this point involving obsession can easily be pinned into this as well, because we could describe obsession itself as an invisible spiral that affects the mind, which is why the curse shows up often when obsession is involved. When it comes to the firing effect, this part of the story is more about demonstrating something about the curse has to do with Dragonfly Pond, and ties into the same strange properties we went over in episode 1, that being bodies cremated in the town will cause spiral smoke that eventually settles into the pond, and those souls of the dead being found in the clay Mr. Goshima uses in his pottery. The typhoon itself is a spiral, so it makes sense why it would be used as a vector for the curse, and it also ties into the mystery of Dragonfly Pond, as each of the typhoons is being sucked into it as well, just like the smoke. The skin growths in the row house play out slightly differently. In the manga, the Goshima family also starts growing the spiral warts, and eventually leave the row house for a time, which made the warts go away. This spiral disease seems to be linked to the row house itself in the manga, but in the anime, only Mr. Wakabayashi is affected by them. This change isn't necessarily bad, as we can argue that in the anime, the reason the warts affected Wakabayashi is because of his perverted obsession with Kiri. There also isn't ever a solid explanation in the manga as to where they go while waiting for the warts to go away, and either way, they eventually end up back in the row house again with no spiral warts ever being an issue. We can call that an uncommon W for the writing team. As we finish up episode 3, we have covered 13 of the 20 chapters in Uzumaki. I've been saying there are 20 chapters because there are, but in reality there are only 19 that really need to be adapted, as chapter 20 is a lost chapter that appears to be either a cut idea that would have been earlier in the timeline, or from a different timeline of events completely. This means we need to get through 6 entire chapters in episode 4, and I do not have high hopes. We start the final episode with a van driving through a tunnel. We get very clunky dialogue from the occupants explaining that no one's been able to contact anyone in Kurozucho since they were hit by the 3rd hurricane, and that there have been 6 storms total. As they exit the tunnel into town, a whirlwind forms behind the car, throwing it into the air and killing 2 of the 3 passengers, the only survivor being a reporter named Chi Maruyama. She goes to get help and finds the town is completely in ruins, with dead bodies littering the rubble of houses. She comes across Dragonfly Pond, now a perpetual whirlpool, before hearing sirens and seeing more whirlwinds headed her way. That's when she's found by Kiri and her younger brother, who tell her to hide. We are shown the whirlwinds are actually being rode by people known as the Butterfly Gang. Their name is a reference to the butterfly effect, which is the concept that small changes can have large consequences on complex systems, like how a butterfly flapping its wings could be a small condition that leads to a tornado that might not have formed otherwise. It's believed by the town that the whirlwinds, which can form by any movement too sudden or sound too loud, are caused by the energy of the 6 typhoons that were sucked into the pond. That's why all the cars are flipped and why the van was hit by a whirlwind the moment they arrived. So to stay safe, they are stuck moving slow as a snail, as the brother puts it. An unfortunate choice of words. Kiri brings Maruyama to the row houses, which are the only places not affected by the whirlwinds. You can even talk normally inside. Everyone in the row house is generally irritable and reluctant to let anyone else in due to the limited space. Suichi is murmuring about spirals in the corner, which causes one man to get fed up and throw him out. They're all kicked out of the row house and are forced to find somewhere else to go. Maruyama wants them to try to find a way out, while the others explain there doesn't appear to be any way to leave the town, and Mr. Goshima says he just wants to rebuild his kiln and perfect his pottery so he can master the art of the spiral. The reporter screams as she comes across some snail people. Kiri notes how there are a lot more of them lately, as they smell something cooking in the distance. They find the Butterfly Gang cooking up and eating the snail people, and are offered some by the creepy leader, who tells the ladies they should join their gang so they can eat good all the time. We get more clunky dialogue about how the Butterfly Gang is actually now the Dragonfly Gang, before Kiri's dad steps in to defend the girls. He's sent flying in a whirlwind by their leader before Kiri shoves him away and into the air. The gang attacks the girls, and they're only saved by Shuichi, who's able to grab onto a telephone pole as the Dragonfly gang is sucked into the whirlpool. The first quarter of this episode adapts chapters 14 and 15, Butterfly and Chaos respectively, but we miss out on an entire plot thread from Butterfly. Miss Maruyama finds 3 kids tied to wooden posts and gagged. She frees them, and they go on to destroy houses and try to blow her away with a whirlwind. She accidentally blows them away instead, and unknowingly kills one of them. That's when she meets Kiri, and we get the explanation of what's going on as they head to the row house. But 2 of those kids find their way back and start attacking it. The row house is shown to be unaffected by the attack, and the occupants band together to blow the kids away. But instead of the kids flying off and dying, they somehow manage to start riding the whirlwinds, as someone compares the way they wheel around to butterflies. This is the first instance of someone riding the whirlwinds, and in chapter 15, Chaos, we see this led to the creation of the tornado riding gang, as they make note of the kids being the first ones, showing it was possible. But they were never the butterfly gang, they were always just the dragonfly gang. I guess they just needed some other way to work in the butterfly effect dialogue. Not great writing here, but I guess it's passable. Chapter 15 is also when they discover the snail people and get kicked out of the row house, leading them to stumble onto the gang and her father getting blown away. One major difference from the anime is that in this chapter, someone in the rafters finds an old map in the plaster of the wall. It shows the town of Kurozucho, but instead of the town, it shows a giant spiral. There's plenty of bad animation here, but overall, a lot of it looks better than what we saw in episode 2, and mainly episode 3. I think out of all of these, episode 3 is probably the worst, because after the Jack in the Box scene, there's really no topping how dog shit it was. The bar is so low that I'm almost surprised by how good some of this ended up looking. We cut to a large group of people making their way through the rubble. A whirlwind comes by and more people are swept off. The group stumbles upon Kiri, Shuichi, and Maruyama and explain how they all got there. Their leader is Mr. Tanizaki, a volunteer who came to aid the town but who's now trapped, as every road or tunnel out of town twists back on itself. They also tried making a raft, but upon seeing another group's raft swallowed by a whirlpool, they completely gave up on the idea. Kiri takes the group back to the collapsed roof her family's been using for shelter. Her mother's legs are broken and Kiri hasn't been able to find her dad. Tanizaki points out their shelter isn't very safe and that they should try and find a row house to stay in. One of their group also starts turning into a snail, and another has a spiral forming on his back. Shuichi believes that the reason more people are turning into snails is because they're being forced to move so slow to prevent whirlwinds that the spiral curse is able to catch up to them. Tazanaki still thinks they need to get to a row house because while they don't know if it'll reverse the transformation, they know it's safer than being outside. When they reach one, they see people are already trying to convince the occupants to let them in. They're told there's no room and to leave, and some of the men try to force their way in. That's when 3 children pop their heads out of the door and try to blow them away. The group outside then grab a beam and charge the door, revealing the twisted bodies of the occupants inside. So many people kept sneaking into the row house that their bodies twisted together and now they can't untangle. The row house bursts open on either side, and as a mass of twisted bodies overflows, the exposed occupants try to cover themselves in scrap wood. As the group leaves, Tazanaki has the idea of extending the sides of the row house to make room for them to be safe inside, while some of the others would rather focus on escaping. This is when they see Navy ships approaching the town and are excited at the thought of finally being rescued, before the sea opens up in a whirlpool and swallows all the ships at once. Later that night, the group is low on food when one of the survivors finds some meat, which turns out to be a snail person left behind by the Dragonfly gang. The group eats it, some less reluctant than others. Some even make comments of how they can't wait to eat the other guy who's turning into a snail. Tazanaki says the girls should eat to keep up their strength, and that the snail people aren't even human anymore. It's implied that the 2 ate some snail meat, and in the morning, Kiri's group head back to her family shelter with some meat to give to her brother and mother. But when they arrive, the shelter is completely gone, and she finds her brother stuck under the rubble, saying a whirlwind blew their mom and the shelter away. When freeing her brother, they see he has a snail shell forming on his back, and Kiri believes she can save him if only they can get out of the town. Her plan is to try and go through the mountain trails instead of using the roads in hope of finding a way to escape. While headed out of town, they notice how the row houses are all centered around Dragonfly Pond, something that wasn't really apparent before every other building in the town was destroyed. They spot someone building onto the row house, setting off whirlwinds, and it turns out to be Mr. Tazanaki, who yells for them that there's no reason to run, sending a whirlwind right at the group. They continue heading out of town, passing the school, and heading into what looks looks like a much more twisted and spiraling forest than anything we've seen before. The group spots people heading towards them, and it turns out to be Takamoto and company, the ones who ate the snail meat with Tazanaki. They saw the group heading out of town and followed them, only for them to run into each other going opposite directions. So there's very obviously something keeping them from even leaving town through the mountains. They begin walking together until the man from earlier, who's already grown a shell, completely turns into a snail. The others are visibly excited and decide to eat him raw. Takamoto decides to crawl into his shell like some bugs do and eat him alive inside. While this scene is pretty fucking gross, it is quite underwhelming compared to what I remember in the manga due to the animation quality. While that group is busy fighting over the snail, Kiri and the others sneak away to continue trying to find a way out. Her brother is noticeably getting worse, and Shuichi is starting to see his father's spiral body when they try to use a tree stump to tell which direction is north. And Maruyama's watch is all distorted as they feel time passing strangely. They run into Takamoto's group walking towards them again, and they seem onto the fact that Mitsuo looks to be turning into a snail. They try to obfuscate, saying it's just a backpack on his back, and Shuichi begins carrying him, before his eyes pop out of his head, and he completely turns into a snail on Shuichi's back. They begin speed walking away from the approaching crazy people, and upon reaching a cliff, Kiri tells Mitsuo to climb down it so he'll be safe, till she can come back for him. Reluctant at first, Kiri pokes him with a stick until he leaves. Then the three pretend they're still carrying him while being chased. Takamoto and the two others begin nutting at the thought of eating another snail, before their bodies completely twist and contort into spirals, and they fall on the ground. The group reaches an overlook and finds a massive spiral structure where Kurozucho used to be. They realize time must have passed faster while they were in the mountains, and that this could possibly be the original shape of the town, even showing us the image on the scroll found in the manga. Kiri decides she needs to go inside of the row house and find her parents, and Shuichi wants to get to the center of the spiral in hopes of solving the mystery of its power. While walking the liminal rows, they run into a much older Tazanaki, carrying spiral corpses over his shoulder. He says it's been years since they left and that the residents are completing the row house from inside. Kiri asks about her parents, and Tazanaki said there was still a couple making pottery near Dragonfly Pond. The trio head inward as Tazanaki notes how he's never actually been anywhere near it due to all the debris stuck in the alleys. As night comes, they discuss the nature of the town's original spiral shape, wondering what its purpose could be. Shuichi speculating that this could have happened over and over again through the centuries. But if it has, why is there no one left to remember? The next morning, they continue their way towards the center of the spiral. They see smoke spiraling in the sky above Dragonfly Pond and decide to quickly follow it. When making their way through an incomplete segment, Maruyama is blocked off by the twisted residents boarding up the walls. And as they complete the segment, they're shouting heard all throughout the spiral building that the entire thing is finally connected, before loud rumbling is heard from inside. When everything goes silent, they open the door and see that the entire spiral is empty, and follow it all the way to the center, where they don't find Dragonfly Pond, but instead find the smoke being sucked into the opening of a spiral staircase below where the center of the pond would have been. The two decide to brave the unknown together and begin walking down the stairs, but when passing a twisted body, it grabs Kiri's leg and bites her ankle, and as a struggle ensues, Shuichi tries to help before he is wrapped up by the man and falls into the hole. This is by far the worst popsicle stick effect I've seen in the entire show, and I don't even know if I can use that term when it's literally a single PNG on both sides, falling with the blur effect. Like, this is the finale, a terrifying moment, and all I can think about is the falling birds from Invincible. Kiri continues running down the hole until she reaches the bottom, which opens to a large pit with a spiral, almost drill-shaped pillar in the middle. She tries to climb down and falls onto the pillar before her hands slip off of that as well, and she falls into the pit. When she wakes up an unspecified time later, she's surrounded by the twisted bodies of the occupants of Kurozucho and looks up to see a massive spiral monolith looming over her. There appears to be some sort of pulsing waves coming from whatever kind of ruins these are, and an almost blinding light accompanies it. She calls out to Shuichi, and among the bodies she finds her parents twisted together. Shuichi calls back to Kiri, and upon reuniting, the two discuss the nature of the spiral monolith. Not knowing who or what built it, they know whatever it is, it's the source of the spiral curse that's been afflicting the town. Having some sort of will of its own, the monolith seems to be luring in the occupants after some predetermined amount of years, absorbing them into its spiral mass. Shuichi doesn't think he can fight the curse anymore and is ready to lay down and give up, but tells Kiri she needs to keep going and find a way out. But Kiri tells Shuichi she also doesn't have any any energy left to fight it either, and that she'd rather stay with him. The two lock hands, which begin twisting together as they embrace for what could be the last time or for the rest of time below this spiral monolith. The ruins begin to rumble as the drill-shaped pillar spins its way back to the surface, locking into place and closing off the entry, as we hear Kiri narrate that the spiral curse on the town has finally come to an end as the credits roll. And then, there's a post-credit scene where we hear Kiri explain how the town crumbled to dust, and over time, a new one was created, as we get a scene that mirrors the first in the show. A woman with black hair and glasses gets off a train, meets her boyfriend at the train station, and they walk home as they discuss the idea of leaving the town, as whirlpools form in the water. Okay, that's actually the end. The ending in the manga and anime are practically identical, with the only difference being a few words, though the post-credit scene is an anime-only edition, and is meant to demonstrate that the cyclical idea of the curse is in fact true. By this point, there isn't much to break down of the curse, as chaos is the name of the game. We know by this point that the row houses had some sort of power connected to the curse, and that the people inside all turn into twisted spirals over time. And though it's shown by the snail eaters that you don't need to be in a row house to turn into a spiral, much like how Shuichi and Kiri twisted together once they gave into the curse, the people who have chosen to stay in the row houses have practically accepted their fate and given up. I also believe the row houses are safe from the snail curse. They theorize that snails are becoming more common due to everyone needing to move slower, which enables them to be caught and transformed into a snail. The reason Kiri's brother becomes affected by the curse is probably due to him staying stationary at the shelter with his mother and getting stuck under the rubble when the shelter was blown away. And we can argue that the reason Tazanaki never turned into a snail is a combination of him continuing to move in the creation of the spiral row houses, and the fact that the alleys of the row houses are also safe from the whirlwind effects. So by that logic, he would also be safe from the snail curse. He could also be less affected by the curse in general since he isn't from Kurozucho. He's just an aid worker who got stuck there. Out of all the characters, Tazanaki is probably the only one who's canonically alive right now and able to escape Kurozucho. Because now that the spiral curse has run its course, people can now safely leave Kurozucho, but who else is there to leave? The only human left alive that we know of is him. We also don't have any explanation of what happens to the snail people, though I'd assume they are still snail people. But in terms of surviving the curse, we can put her brother on the list as well. He is a snail, but he's still alive. As for the source of the curse, we learn the spiral monolith is the cause of the curse, but we're never given an explanation of why. And I think we're better off for that. The fact we don't know what it is what makes it so terrifying. We do not know what the goal of this monolith is, who created it, why it's chosen this spot, or why it's represented by the spiral. It's just the horrifying reality they have to live in, like a lone ant being stepped on by the boot of someone walking by. The people of this town are powerless to stop anything happening, and just have to exist through it till they don't exist anymore. My final review of the show is to give it a 1 out of 5. Most of that 1 coming from the fact I do actually commend them for finishing the show. Trying to think of what this show would look like at its peak, if it had good animation quality all the way throughout, I still don't know if I would like it as an adaptation. As I pointed out throughout this video, there are a lot of issues with the writing. We're leaving out plot points just to throw them in later with no context. Episode 3 had terrible pacing, and one of the creepiest parts of the story is just ran over. I also didn't like how we just didn't use narration at all throughout most of this. Kiri steps in and starts narrating at the way end, but that would have been so useful earlier on to just explain stuff better, so I didn't have to. At its peak, if this show had maybe 5 episodes that were all 25 minutes long, that would probably be enough to adapt this better. We didn't get that, and we're not going to get that. What we have is this. Uzumaki. 4 episodes, 1 completed, 3 steaming piles of garbage, with subpar writing. Deep down, I can definitely see myself loving this show for how bad it is, though. It is good because it is bad. Especially if you've read the source material, seeing what it turned into is just astonishing, in a way. I'm almost shell-shocked by how bad some of it turned out. And with that, we've reached the end of my Uzumaki breakdown and review. If you haven't already, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out some of my other videos. We are in the spooky season, so I do plan to do at least one more horror review this month. Until then, have a good day.